Today is day 191. We're making great progress. We have 174 days to go, so more days behind us than we have ahead of us. So we're making great progress. Anyway, so if you're joining me for the first time, welcome. This is the Bible in 1 Year podcast where we go through the Bible from cover to cover, beginning to end. And I narrate the stories, I retell them. If I have an insight, an agreement, understanding, I share. If I disagree, I share too. We follow a structured guide using this daily Bible guide where we look at an Old Testament, a New Testament, a Psalm, and a Proverb every single day. Why did I choose to do this? The first time I did this, I really felt like it impacted and transformed my journey. So what I currently am today I became this way after reading through the Bible in 1 year. Like some depth of wisdom and courage and confidence just came over me. At that time I was in a really bad place. Really bad place. So just reading it, I remember thinking, wow, I learned so many things. And I'm gonna do a summary of what the first 6 months have been like so far. That said, I thought that I needed to do it again because we've come into a new year and new levels require new preparations. So I went back to reading the Bible through in 1 year and I decided, why don't I share this with an audience, so that I can be held accountable. And so that's what I'm doing right now. So far, it's been great. I've had people subscribe who follow and people who learn. Someone said to me that, oh, I can't remember when last I read the Bible, but just listen to you tell the stories make me feel like I should go back and read it again, which is the idea. The idea is that you can read the Bible for yourself and not always rely on third-hand or second-hand information from other people. Why don't you read it for yourself? So that's the idea. So every single day we read through the Bible, but I've said too much and let's get in. So today we're going to be looking at the book of First Chronicles chapters 9 and 10. And Acts chapters 27, we're concluding Acts 27, and Proverbs 18, 23 and 24. Now, because those are just two verses, I'm going to switch things up a bit and start with Proverbs. So Proverbs 18, 23 and 24 says, I normally just read them. I don't really give any commentary on Proverbs and Psalms. We're done with the Psalms anyway. Proverbs, a poor man uses entreaties, but the rich answers roughly. I don't want to go into what I think that means. A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Hi there, I see you. So say something in the comments below. There's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. So that's Proverbs for today. Now let's go into Chronicles. So over the last few days, I've been commenting on the book of Chronicles. This is chapters 9. And basically, we're still going through genealogy. So today is the first day that we begin to look at the kings. So basically, Chronicles is like recounting everything that has happened from the beginning of the documentation of the Jewish life up until when the kingdom was dissolved and the inhabitants were carted away. So this is the first chronicle. All right, so I like to look at my notes. So all of Israel have been written, the whole history of Israel up until yesterday, verses chapters 8, all of Israel has been captured in the book of Kings. And then, at some time they were exiled to Babylon. I think we did that about last week, I think, where the Israelites were exiled to Babylon. So people began to come back. They were exiled to Babylon because of their faithfulness, but they began to return. And they came in groups and batches. I see you guys. I see you say something. Yeah. So let me quickly make sure I don't miss. So the first set of people to come back from Babylon back to Jerusalem were the priests, then the Levites, then temple servants, and then other people. Okay, folks from Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, Judah, house of Joseph, and house of Joseph is Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph has the right of the firstborn, even though he was, I think, the 11th born. settled in Jerusalem. So now, 690 families of Judah returned, 956 from Benjamin returned. This is all from. Do you know that song that Ben? Do you know how many of you were born in the 80s? So Bonnie M was a popular musician then. So there's this popular song, by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we were, when we remembered Zion. So that's what was going on. This was the era. They were writing about this era of the Israelites. Anyway, so they were in Babylon and then they were coming back, right? So 956 families from Benjamin returned, 1,760 priests returned, 212 gatekeepers. So gatekeepers were appointed by Saul and David to guard the temple, to watch the articles on the temple, watch the furnishings, ensure that nothing was stolen, open the gates in the morning, and all of that. They 212 of them returned. They also managed groceries and supplies. So a guy called Matthias, I don't know why it was listed, they just singled him out and said Matthias was the guy in charge of baking the bread. So one of the things that I've learned is that eating and music are a very heavy part of worship. A very heavy part of worship. So he was supposed to be making the bread for the altar, so he was listed. Then the musicians. So the musicians were also described, and the musicians were like celebrities. They had no other work other than to sing. They were accommodated, and they lived in the temple, and they were exempt from all other duties, and all they were asked to do was sing for worship, for the temple worship. All right, so Saul's family tree was also listed again, because we looked at Saul's family tree yesterday, so I'm not sure why it's coming up again, and I didn't bother to go into the details. It's a very rich history, but I just summarized here that Ner gave birth to Kish, Kish gave birth to Saul, Saul gave birth to Jonathan, Jonathan gave birth to Meribah, and there's several other descendants as well. So that ended chapters 11, and then chapters 9, and then chapters 10, we're now looking at the war between the Philistines and Israel and how King Saul passed on. So in that final war, the Philistines were getting an upper hand on the slopes of Gilboa, and so all the 3 sons of Saul had been killed during the war. Saul was mortally wounded, and so he realized that he was mortally wounded. And you know how these people are. If the enemies get a hold of the king, they would make a mockery of him. They might cut his thumbs, they might make him a slave. He'll be a captive of war. They will really ridicule him. So he asked his armor bearer, please end my life. Euthanasia, mercy killing, kill me, we are at war. And the guy was afraid. So Paul committed suicide by falling on his own sword. And then when the armor bearer saw that, he also did the same thing. And so that ended an entire dynasty. Once the Israelites heard that King Saul and his sons had been eliminated, they fled their towns. Everybody absconded because the Philistines moved in straight into the houses and occupied them. The next day they stripped the dead, as is the customs during war. They find spoils of war, they have golden articles on them, strip them of their outfit. They go to their houses, take their cattle. If they are women, they confiscate them, and all sorts of things. A very gory life in the past. Anyway, they are stripped, and then they take Paul, decapitate him, and hang his head in the temple of their god Dagon. But when the men of Jabesh Gilead heard that Paul had been King Saul, I don't know why I keep calling him Paul, I guess because of the Paul we're talking about in the New Testament. So when they heard that King Saul had been, treated, desecrated, his body had been desecrated, they went and got his body and those of his sons and brought them back to Jabesh Gilead and buried them. And that ended an entire dynasty. And then they fasted for 7 days. This is grim, so I don't feel like demonstrating or dramatizing, or there's no humor here. It is said here as the final note that Saul died because he failed to obey God. He was unfaithful to God. He consulted mediums instead of consulting with God, and God killed him. That was what was written there. God killed him and turned his kingdom over to the son of Jesse, the person we know as King David. So that ends the Old Testament reading. The New Testament reading, we're looking at Paul. Remember, there was a shipwreck from yesterday, or there was a looming shipwreck from yesterday. They were on their way to Italy, and for 14 days they were tossed to and fro the sea, completely lost direction, and were just floating, hoping to find land. Eventually, floating at sea with no food, having not really eaten anything for over 2 weeks, Paul began to encourage them. You guys should have listened to me. In any case, I had a dream last night, and an angel appeared to me saying that nobody would die, nobody would be lost. I'm going to stand before Caesar. So he tells them, let's eat, okay? Let's eat. I believe God. At midnight, on day 14, they were tossed across the Sea of Adria, and then sailors sensed that there was land near, so they dropped the anchor. The first time they dropped the anchor, it was 120 feet. The second time they dropped the anchor, it was 90 feet. So they're like, oh, there's land around. Okay, that means we need to make sure we don't run aground. And so they began to lower their lifeboats so that maybe they could swim to shore. But Paul said, don't. If you do so, you'll be killed. So the lifeboats drifted away and they were trapped on the ship. So I guess people who travel by ships, these big ships that dock, my husband and I were supposed to travel on one of such trips like about 4 years ago, just before the COVID, the year before the COVID. And we had deposited money, and we saved money, and we're putting money together, and we're going to travel across the Mediterranean. I feel like I would have been able to relate better if I had gone on that trip. Anyway, this seemed like a luxury liner. So anyway, they dropped the lifeboats and they were trapped in the sea up until they finally saw land. They finally saw land. Paul had already told them that no one would die, so they should all calm down. And they were encouraged to eat. Paul started it. He broke bread. He prayed over the bread, broke it, ate, and everybody else felt okay, they could eat. Then, because they were still floating, that meant they were still heavy. They offloaded some more cargo into the sea to lighten the load, so that I guess maybe there was water in the boats, in the ship. Yeah. Hi, Joseph. Good to see you today from Kenya. Good to see you. So I guess they maybe a lot of rain entered the ship, so I guess it was heavy, so they needed to offload as much cargo as they could so that they could sail towards the coastline. 276 people were on board. 276 people were on board, and they lowered their anchors, their rudders, they raised the foresail, and they headed to shore. Pretty soon they had run aground, and the force of the waves even caused their stem to break apart. So soldiers, when they saw that we have come close enough for people to attempt to run away, the soldiers decided that they were just going to eliminate all the prisoners that they had in their midst. But the commanding officer wanted to save Paul, and he was like, no, there's no need for that. They will not run away. You understand? Because of Paul. So he said, look, we have come close. So they cut all the anchors so that the ship could run aground. This ship is not going to, we don't have anything now. It needs to be treated. It needs to be, maybe it's like a car that had an accident. So we're going to have to spend time fixing it. So let's just get out of this. We're done. So they cut the anchors and dropped the anchors, and then they headed for shore. And then the commanding officer ordered those who could swim to jump overboard and swim to shore. And then those who couldn't could now. After all, the ship was breaking apart at this point. The waves were really strong and it was hitting, the ship. So everything was breaking apart. So any debris of the ship, anyone who couldn't swim hung on to something, maybe a piece of plank or debris, so that they could get to shore. And that was how every single one of them made it to shore. And that ends our New Testament reading today. So when tomorrow we'll see what happens at shore. We'll see what happens at shore when they get to shore and see what transpires. All right. So thank you all for joining me, Joseph. Good to have you here today. All right. I wonder. All right. So we'll talk offline. We'll talk offline. So I hope you guys enjoyed today. We've come to the end of today. Please, if you have, please subscribe to my channel. Share this with anyone you think needs to know more about the Bible, who's curious, and turn on the notification button to know when next I go live, so that maybe you can just catch me live. All right. So I'll see you tomorrow. God bless.